coming out on one of our nice spring summer nights. I'm Jean Curtis, County Commissioner. I'm pleased to be here tonight for the Industrial Lands Assessment overview that tell us what they've learned. So Missoula County and through the Big Sky Trust Fund and Brad and MEP, we decided that it was important for us to look at, as we started to have more and more interest in industrial lands in Missoula County, city and the county, we wanted to have an assessment of what do we have. When someone calls and says, I'm interested in coming to Missoula, I have such and such a kind of business, and I need this much land, how do you know where to guide them? Or it could be somebody here locally that wanted to grow. So we did apply for a Big Sky Trust Fund grant and were funded, and we hired, we did an RFP, and the winning group was professional consultants and the O'Connor Center to join together and not only look at the lands, but also look at the economics of the use of the land. And so I'd like to introduce John Kellogg, who will give us an overview. And thanks for coming.
Thank you, Commissioner Kurtz. Do we need the microphones on to hear you?
They pick up it picks up better on the camera for sure if you have
Great.
a microphone.
Thank you for coming tonight. I can't begin to tell you how many people over the last year have told us how important they think this study is. And we're grateful that the commissioners were recognizing of the importance of this study. I think...
Is your green light on, John? Push the red button.
The red, there, okay. Thank you. And the importance of this study has been recognized, and I want to thank Marcy Allen and Brett and of course Barb Martins for working initially with us, and Dory Brownlow now for working with us to bring this study before you tonight. We've worked with so many people in the city and county that I can't begin to give them recognition here tonight, but we appreciate the input that they've all given us. Thank you. While our part of the study is drawing to a close here tonight, I'd like to think that we've just laid the groundwork for an ongoing living, breathing study. A living, breathing study that will be an important resource for those who, like many of you here tonight, are actively developing or growing local industries. And we also think it will help those, of course, who are looking to bring in industries from outside the area that will help our thriving economy. There are three main facets to this study. First of all is the interactive map that's on the screen behind me. Secondly is a study that Dr. Swanson did with the O'Connor Center for the Rocky Mountain West that analyzed economic trends, looked at where our industrial needs are going to be over the next 20 years, and tried to project how we can adapt to those needs and accommodate those needs. And the third leg of this is the inventory of industrial lands and matrix analysis of the infrastructure that serves those lands. And Matt Smith and Dale McCormick from our office are going to present that later on here tonight. I'd like to get into kind of the heart of the focus of the project we've been working on, which is this map, this interactive map. This has been available online in kind of an obscure site, but I believe shortly we'll be able to put this on the county's website and link it to our study. When you first bring up the map, I'll play with the mouse over here. When you first bring up the map, it shows the blocks of land that we've identified for, can this zoom in? Oh, there we go. We've got Missoula County and the blocks of industrial land within the county that we've identified to enable us to analyze the lands and the infrastructure that's serving those lands. There's some opportunities here for changing the base map. The one that provides the greatest information is the satellite imagery that goes down to, you're familiar with Google Earth, and so you know what satellite imagery can do. For right now, though, for simplification and ease of seeing where we are, we'll leave the roads base map on there. When you click the legend, okay, the contents of the map, there we go. And come down and take off the blocks. The focus of our study includes lands that are designated industrial on either a comprehensive plan or growth policy, and added to those lands within the city and county of Missoula that are zoned for industrial use. Overlapping those also are lands that Department of Revenue has identified as industrially taxed lands. But altogether, between the two here, we have 8,446.58 acres in 1,189 separate parcels. This brings up 2 points. One, which is a spoiler alert for later on in the study here, we have a lot of industrial land in the county. 8,000 acres is huge. Even if you don't include the Frenchtown Mill, there's over 5,000 acres of industrially zoned or designated land in the county set aside for that use. This includes land that's currently occupied by industrial uses and land that may be vacant but is potentially to be used for industry in the future. So the second aspect of having this much acreage and this many parcels to work with is it's a cumbersome process to go parcel by parcel through this. So what we did was block together lands that were either geographically isolated from other lands or had similar characteristics of zoning, similar characteristics of infrastructure, or similar topographic characteristics that made it reasonable to lump those together. While we consolidated the study and focused on these blocks of land and their capability for serving the industrial needs, we didn't lose track of the individual parcels within these blocks of land. And so when you zoom in on this map and want to look at a particular parcel of land that may have been used for, maybe zoned for industrial use, let's pick a parcel right about there. And it brings up an explanation of anywhere from 1 to about 6 different indications of what is on that land. First of all, the zoning designation. Secondly, goes into land use designation from the Urban Comprehensive Plan. Then it goes into ownership and basic the information that the Department of Revenue provides. And finally, there's a little more specific areas and acreages. If I'd highlight the blocks here too, then the first of these blocks, the first of these explanations that comes up will indicate, no, it doesn't this time, should indicate what block this belongs to. Here we go. It's in block number 27, which we'll see an explanation of in the matrices later on. How many acres in gross are within that block, and percent of that block that's built out, and the percent that's vacant. So I'd like to just emphasize that we haven't lost individual parcel information when we consolidated into blocks, but we've still kept that as we carried through. Continuing down in the table of contents, we've further included a number of zoning designations. Mixed-use zoning, which overlays the top of a lot of industrially zoned land within the city. There's, in addition, there is the South Side Riverfront ordinance area, which is an area that's transitioning right now from light industry to multifamily mixed use and single-family residential. I'd like to quickly go through a number of other overlays that are that we've included on this map. Of course, there's city boundary. The urban service area is also shown. The air stagnation zone, if you want to highlight it. The airport influence zone. And each of these, of course, has an impact on the potential for use of industrial lands within those various districts, of course. We've also included the urban renewal district boundaries. Let me unclick some of these so you can see the district boundaries a little bit better, including recently designated urban renewal districts and the tax increment financing and targeted economic development boundaries of districts that the commissioners have identified in the county. In the floodplain map, there's numerous floodplains that are included here, including the Grant Creek floodplain, the Clark Fork floodplain, and others, and these are shaded in different colors shown on here. If you're using this map, when you zoom in past a certain point, because FEMA doesn't want you to use this for individual parcel information, the floodplain map disappears. However, it enabled us to identify those industrial blocks of land that may be impacted from being within the floodplain. We were also able to map the truck routes, which largely coincide with the arterials throughout the city of Missoula. Missoula County Rails, we were extremely fortunate here. The generic information that we initially had, which shows the main east-west and Bitterroot branch lines, is good for basic, but when we went to MRL, they were willing to give us very detailed information, which turned out to be a real boon to our study, which shows all of the individual rail lines throughout the county. Now, the importance of this is that when we're looking at spur lines that go out into the blocks of land that we're analyzing, we want to know which blocks of land have spurs available, or sidings that came off adjacent to those. So that fed a good bit of information into our analysis of the suitability of these parcels for having rail service available to them. The Missoula fiber map you've certainly read about in the newspaper. That's kind of an exciting story. I think that there's been a lot of effort by Bitterroot Economic Development District and ALPS. David Bell of ALPS was able to get the service providers to give them information on where the fiber optic lines ran throughout the city. And what they found was kind of surprising. It was difficult initially getting this information from the internet service providers, but once it was mapped, it showed that the extension of fiber optic line is really pretty thorough, covering a lot of the urban area. There's certainly room for improvement there, and fortunately, Bitterroot Economic Development District and some numerous committees and folks are working toward enabling that to be expanded for us. We also had mapped the BPA transmission lines, and the Montana Development of Environmental Quality has identified potential sites of hazardous waste monitoring that could be buried storage tanks, could be open pit mines, and we've also included those on this map too. It turns out to be a very flexible tool, and thanks to Nate Rogers from CAPS and his willingness to work along with us, we were able to consolidate this information onto this map. And a little bit later on, I'd like to go into further detail, and Dale and Matt are going to go into further detail on how these infrastructure overlays affect the suitability of these blocks of land for industrial use. But right now, I'd like to let Larry Swanson tell us a little bit about what direction the industrial demand is going over the next 20 years. He's analyzed this very carefully and very thoroughly, and I think you'll be enlightened by what he's found out.
First of all, I brought some hard copy of just a summary and an overview, and then this is a last section that kind of deals with past target industry studies that the Missoula area has done over the years, including the one done for the airport, and Brad has done some target industry work, and the Missoula Economic Partnership. So there's only about 14 of these, but there's probably 20 of you guys, and I'll just let you hand them around, and they're take-homes. The work that I did on this was in cooperation with PCI, and this is kind of the work plan that I went through. It's a fairly extensive amount of work. We were asked to look at population and demographic trends, so population size, growth patterns, also age composition, and change over time, and projections for the next 20 years. I had done some projections for the Missoula public school system, and so this provided an opportunity to go back to those and then update them with more current information. But it's an interesting picture that's emerging, and I'm just going to touch on some of that here tonight. Labor force growth patterns, area economy patterns of growth and change, so pre-recession, recession, post-recession, kind of where we're at in terms of the Missoula area economy. Examine these past target industry studies to determine to what degree they're useful in guiding us forward, particularly as it regards these industrial properties and lands. We also wanted to look at the Missoula area economy in relation to a lot of other areas, because when you put together an economic study for one area and you look at the numbers by themselves don't, it's not self-evident what they're telling you. And so if you put them into context against a lot of other places that are similar to your place, a peer review process, you can do some comparisons. So we did quite a few of those in this study. And then the last part is looking at some projections for Missoula County and western Montana, and then to interrelate these back into the work that was being done by PCI. This looks at population change by component, natural change, and net migration. So this is kind of looking historically and then out through 2030. And all of those red bars are net migration, past and projected, and the green bars are estimated natural change, births over deaths. So those together give us population change in Missoula County, and you can see a different picture when you go back to the early 70s where the graph begins, and then on out as it extends out into 2030. And that's just kind of projecting what we expect to happen. When you look at the population of Missoula and compare it to Montana and surrounding areas, Montana, while it's looked upon as being a rural state, we've got about 80% of our population within 50 miles of 7 places. And Missoula is the second largest population concentration. It's only a couple of thousand less than Billings in that 50-mile surrounding area, but when you again map it and count it up, that's the picture that emerges. So we really need to think of these economies of areas as not so much rural economies as they are small cities. And when you put that into your thinking, you begin to see a lot of the change that's been going on over the last 20 years, and you can also see where it's going to go kind of going forward. This is just population change from 2000 to 2010, and so where did Montana grow and where did it decline? When you go from west, and that's at the left side of that, to east, that's on the right side, population growth was concentrated in those 4, 5, or 6 places, including Missoula. Gallatin County, the most, Yellowstone, Flathead, Missoula, Lewis Clark, Ravalli and Lake are very high on both sides of Missoula. So that's why when you add those into the Missoula area population, you get something equivalent to what you find around Billings. This is the aging pattern of the population, and we're using the 1990, 2000, and 2010 census. And I know it's very hard for you to make that out, but what we're trying to do is from left to right, look at how population has changed from the youngest age groups to the oldest. So the left side of this is how many people we had at those different census periods, very young to very old. And the red bars show you what the 2010 census looks like. And if you kind of look at those over time, there's a shift in the population into these older age categories, and that lower chart kind of demonstrates that by showing you just change from census to census. But really the red ones to the right are the boomers. Behind the boomers, before you get to the millennials, is a declining population, and then you have the millennials. And in our region of the country, we have more boomers than millennials. They're just recent information that nationally, millennials became the largest age group. That's not true in our region. And the reason for that is so much of our growth over the last 20 years through net migration was 40 and older population. It was an older age group. And what that did was it padded the boomer group that was already here with more boomers. And we don't tend to hang on to as many of our young adults. They tend to go somewhere else and then sometimes come back. But what that means is we take this forward from 2010 to 2020, our greatest growth is in those yellow bars, which is people in their 60s and 70s. And then you can see the millennial back there right behind them, okay? And then as we go to 2020 and 2030, we'll have most of our growth 70s and 80s. And so this just keeps pushing out. Again, this is something that's in this full report. And I put this online, and since this is being taped, let me give you the address. So there's about a 150-page report, but if you want to just get it online, it's http://crmw.org/downloads/Missoula Industrial Lands Study.html. And you should be able to get to it. There's a lot of pages, a lot of charts, but it's basically looking at all of those various areas that we were asked to look at. Missoula essentially is, for the last 5 or 6 years, is growing at about 1% a year in population. The last 5 or 6 years it's been from 0.6 to 0.9. It's never went over 1%. And so we've got slower population growth kind of projected going forward. A lot of that associated with the fact that older population, less births, more deaths. So that's going to sort of neutralize some of the growth that you're going to get from net migration. But also migration has slowed down. We're not getting anything like we did in the early 90s, mid-90s. That slowed, and it's kind of continuing along in that kind of a pattern. I mentioned that we wanted to look at a lot of other places in looking at the kind of information we wanted to produce for Missoula, and so we just picked out 50 metro and micropolitan places in the western United States. The green ones are micropolitan, census-designated places. The blue bars are metropolitan places, just like Missoula. Missoula sits right in the middle of those, and then the smallest place is Helena, Montana. You can see Bozeman's in that group, Kalispell. The biggest place is Billings, Montana. So this allows us to take a cross-section across the western United States, all the way to the Midwest and then out to the Pacific coast, pick some areas and do some comparisons. Here's where all of those places are. And then when we do something like this, if we just look at population growth in the 90s, Missoula ranks up there, I don't know, it's about 10th. You can see it, it's kind of highlighted there. All of those kind of purple bars are Rocky Mountain West. So that's that Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado. The other colors are the other regions, but you can see that there was a lot of growth concentrated in the 90s in those places in our larger Rocky Mountain area. The yellow ones are the Midwest, the Plains region, and those are congregated at the bottom. And this is 2000 to 2010, and you can see that growth in Missoula has slowed. So we've not only slowed overall, all places have kind of slowed, but we've slowed a little bit more in that we've slipped rank-wise against the peers. And then this is growth patterns when you map it out. So this gives us a picture of the 80s, the 90s, all of that concentrated red in the interior west was a lot of net migration that moved into our area. And then this is this more recent 10-year period, and it's subsided quite a bit, and it's getting more choosy in terms of where this growth is going to occur. This is the young adult population, 25 to 39. We can see that Missoula's aging, but when we look at its young adult population as a percent of the total, that 25 to 39 population, Missoula's up near the top of this. So we have an aging population, but we're relatively young to 50 peers, in relation to 50 peers. So this is why we do these peer comparisons. And you can see the other places, Bozeman's up there, places like that, okay? This is then looking at the adult population that's college educated. Missoula is also very near the top on that, about the same place as we are in terms of the young adult population. And then this starts looking at the economy. We get income, and income is what goes into your pocket. It's not wealth. Wealth is an asset that you hold. This is income, so it's received and disposed of, disposable income. Labor earnings are the biggest part of that, so that's employment earnings. Investment income is what is pulled out of those investments. You can see what that looks like. And then transfer payments is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and that type of thing. And these are how the percentages of those has changed over time. So if we go back to the early 70s, 75% of our income was from employment earnings, and more recently that's down to 62%, and by 2030 we'll have a 50-50 economy, and that's because of the aging, more people moving into categories where transfer payment and investment income is received. But see, that changes the whole complexion of, you know, what's working in terms of income to drive consumption, housing, healthcare, education, everything all the way across. This is then total employment. That's a BEA area, a BEA number compared with a BLS, or Bureau of Labor Statistic number, on the size of our labor force, and then BLS employment. And what this does is kind of allow us to gauge over time total employment in relation to the size of our workforce. And as that number in that lower graph goes up, that means we have more and more people working more than one job. So in other words, if you go back to the early period where that's closer to one, you had one worker, you had one job. More recently, it's a much different picture, so more and more people with more jobs than just one, because the total employment number covers all jobs, full and part-time. So anyway, that's what that tells you, but it's another indication of the changing complexion of the economy. This then focuses down on, because we don't have time to go through all of this, but focuses on employment in manufacturing, transportation and utilities, and wholesale trade. So we kind of focused on these key sectors as sectors that are most involved with utilizing industrial lands or needing industrial lands. When you sort of drive around these industrial lands and you look at what's there, a lot of it falls into the category of manufacturing, transportation, a lot of truck firms, freight handling firms, utilities, and wholesale trade, because on some of these lands you'll have warehouse facilities, things like that. So this looks at from 69 through 2013, and you can see that manufacturing employment in Missoula County peaked in 1979. And so, and then that big fall in 4 years was the early 80s recession and collapse in the housing and construction industries. A little recovery after that, and then almost a steady decline through the 90s and then the more recent decade. So basically you went from employment of, and I'm trying to read these numbers at a distance, but over 5,000 to less than half that over that period. It also shows what's happening in transportation and utilities, which was steadily growing up until about 2000, and then it's been steadily falling. And a lot of that decline in transportation and utilities employment is trucking. There's just a lot less trucking employment in and around Missoula. And then the lower one is wholesale trade employment. Now what you see is those three sectors that are sort of most associated with industrial locations have converged. They're all roughly the same size. And so when you go around and look at what's actually on these lands, you find a mix. You'll find some industrial type activity, although that's sharply declining for a long period, and much of that concentrated in wood products, and then more recently paper plant, and the gradual year by year phasing down of that plant and the loss of employment. So this is kind of where we end up in that. And this is when we look at nationally. So this is a chart looking at national employment in durable manufacturing. That's that very top line. And then the fourth line down is non-durable manufacturing. Those are the two largest categories. And so the U.S. Across the country has really been reducing manufacturing employment, both in durables and non-durables. This has been going on for a very long time, and a lot of that's associated with an internationalizing economy. The U.S. kind of, its role as a manufacturer in the world is decreasing, and its role in other areas is increasing, whether that be finance, insurance, investment, some of your technology areas. And where we do have growing areas of manufacturing in the U.S., they tend to have, it tends to be areas where there is intellectual property or there's a high R&D component or something that provides a reason why the U.S. is a good location for it. Sometimes companies will keep manufacturing in the U.S. that has a lot of intellectual property just so they don't lose that as readily when they locate those plants overseas or in other locations. So some of that's at work, but anyway, nationally we've got this kind of picture, and we're also looking at that employment in durables and non-durable manufacturing in relation to other parts of the economy there. You can't see this, I know, but what this does is it looks at every subsector of manufacturing in the U.S., and it looks at it from 01 through 2012, and then on the right-hand side, in the pre-recession period from 01 to 07, it then looks at change just prior to the recession. The next column then looks at change from 07 to basically 2010 in the recession. And the last column is post-recession. But essentially, everything that's in red is a loss. So you can see that every single subsector within manufacturing in the United States saw a decline in employment prior to the recession, during the recession, and then a lot of that is seeing some recovery, but it's not even recovery back to pre-recession levels in a lot of cases. So this is kind of the larger picture in which we're operating. And then this is just looking at manufacturing employment in Montana's peer counties. So from those 50 peers, here's what it looks like in those other places. And I know that Great Falls, presents a picture of a lot of manufacturing, but they're actually at a very low level. They're at a lower level than Missoula, and you can see Lewis and Clark is just below them, but you can see the picture in some of these other areas. Now this looks at employment growth in the Missoula economy overall, that orange line, and you can see the two decline periods. One was the early 80s and one was this more recent recession. And then below that is taking all of these from this chart and then putting them in relation to total employment. So you can see that in essence, when we look at employment and the way it has grown so aggressively in Missoula County, it's growing, the economy is essentially growing away from those other areas which are seeing very little, if any, growth at all. And then this is looking at all the employment for all the sectors of the economy, and again, a lot of information, but at the very top, the largest area of employment is healthcare. And right behind that is retail trade, and you can see that fell off in the recession and is now recovering. Now, the thing that's going on in retail trade is we're moving steadily from less than 10% of retail trade in the U.S. being online to probably starting about 10 years ago and then going for another 10 years, a third of retail trade in the U.S. will be online, which means that a lot of this is going to change. The U.S. has about 2 or 3 times more retail square footage than any other country in the world. So a lot of physical square footage that's now sort of being abandoned. And so you're going to see less emphasis on retail trade in physical space. You can go out to Southgate Mall and see that type of thing, for example. And it's moving into a different realm. This then looks at manufacturing as a share of all employment in Missoula County over time. So it went from 13% down to less than 3%. So that's that gray bar over time. And what that is basically just industry and economic restructuring. This then looks at those 50 peers and says, okay, Missoula, you're losing a lot of your manufacturing employment, but for the 01 through 2012 period of those 50 peers, all of those in the lower part of this chart lost employment. They're behind zero. The only ones adding that manufacturing employment are the ones on the top. So Logan, Utah, St. Joseph, Midland, Texas, Flagstaff, Arizona, Odessa, Texas. You can see the Coeur d'Alene is up there, St. George. Missoula is down. You can see where they are, along with Kalispell, Great Falls, where it is in the chart. And then this looks at, for the 7-county Northwest region, and I'm going to speed through this. These are the 10-year projections from 2012 to 2022 as to where employment growth is expected in a 7-county area that includes Missoula. And those are the projections for, or those bars show the actual number in 2012 and the projected number for 2022. So healthcare is at the top of that again, retail, trade. This is just growth in jobs or employment. Healthcare at the top. Accommodations and, God, I'm having trouble reading. I'll just stand up here. Food services, retail trade, administrative and support and waste services is a fast-growing area. A lot of your administrative services are basically companies that do services for other companies. Companies are outsourcing a lot of what they used to do internally, and when they outsource it, and buy it back from a contractor, it's called administrative services. So you can see a lot of growth in that. Professional, scientific, and technical services right behind that. The ones in the kind of orange color are somewhere in retail or services trade. Blue is healthcare, and then down here is manufacturing. So we're expected to add in this 7-county area a little over 500 jobs over this 10-year period, in spite of the fact that all of that area has been losing jobs most of the period. So then this looks at another aspect, and this is looking at all of the sectors of the Missoula economy in terms of their labor income. And you see that line. Now this is using the SIC codes, SIC codes for the 1980 to 2000 period, and that big line going up through the roof is just services. And because SICs could tell us so little about what that was, we had to redo the industry codes, and now these are the NAICS codes. And services was broke into about 8 separate sectors. But once we do that and we put that on a chart, the one at the top in labor earnings is healthcare. That's how big it is in Missoula. It's massive. And then you can see the other ones in this. So while manufacturing, transportation, utilities, wholesale trade, relatively, down in the chart here, the lower parts, and kind of stagnant, if not declining, there's where most of our growth has been concentrated. This then looks at just labor earnings for 01, 07, 10, and 12. So you're looking at pre-recession, post-recession. And then this kind of aggregates some of this information to tell you what kind of economy do we have now in Missoula, from largest to smallest. And our largest segment is healthcare, and that's at the top. Our next largest is retail and services trade. That's just below it, but it's declining over time. And then just below that is professional and business services, and that's slowly growing. And then you see state government, which includes the university, largely staying in where it is, and you can work on down that. Now you see manufacturing, about the third one up from the bottom. You can see the decline in manufacturing over time in the Missoula economy. It's a lot. And the reason for that is so much of the manufacturing was heavily concentrated in wood products and paper. So when you lose those two big parts to the degree that we have, that's the kind of change you see. Here's then just doing a 50-city comparison. How important is healthcare to Missoula? Well, we're fourth from the top. So when we look at healthcare and we look at how important it is as a share of our economy, we're right up there near the top. You can see the other places. A lot of these Missoula places or Montana places are fairly highly concentrated or specialized in some of this healthcare. This is professional technical services. Missoula's up near the top there as well. Who's at the very top? Bozeman. And this really explains why Bozeman is such a aggressively growing economy. This area of their economy is fast growing. They have a high concentration in it, and it's also the fastest growing piece of the U.S. economy. This is then looking at manufacturing specialization, and you can see Missoula, Great Falls near the bottom of that. So as we go through this economic change, we've slipped to the bottom of that, whereas Bozeman, they're only a few above us in terms of manufacturing. Kalispell's up there toward the middle, and then you can see the other places. When you look at this bar, you can see there's a lot of yellow bars at the top. Yellow bars are mostly in the plains, whether that's somewhere from Texas to North Dakota. And the purple bars are mainly in the Rockies, and they're near the bottom. Whereas if you look at health or professional technical services, they're mainly in the Rockies, and the plains have less. And if you look at healthcare, you can see how that distributes itself. So then this is looking at labor earnings in Missoula County and manufacturing, transportation, public utilities, wholesale trade. You can see what that picture is. Basically peaked in 1979. This is growth in labor earnings overall in the Missoula economy, the orange versus those more industrial sectors. So we went from almost 18% of our labor earnings in 1977 that came from manufacturing to now it's about 3.2%. And these are the actual numbers. I just put them in the PowerPoint. We don't have time to discuss them, but if we look at manufacturing here, and these are a breakdown of all the various categories, you can see the red bar. All of manufacturing was declining in Missoula pre-recession, recession, post-recession. When we look at those 50 peer areas and then we try to pull out the ones that are just mainly from the interior west, and that's what we have here. We then compare those in terms of manufacturing specialization, and you can see how Missoula compares to those. Now, we have some places nearby us, relatively nearby us, where they're much higher in terms of manufacturing specialization, and some of those areas are actually growing. Now, Logan, Utah is at the top. You've got Corvallis, Oregon, Roseburg, Oregon. Both of those still have quite a bit of wood products accounting for that. Flagstaff, Arizona, Twin Falls, Idaho. A lot of that is they have a growing food manufacturing industry in Twin Falls. Pocatello, Kalispell, Coeur d'Alene, you can see them. And anyway, you can work your way down, but when you get to Missoula there, we've got some of the largest decline that you'll see in this. This is then these employment levels for these various places, and here's change. So from 01 to 012, we still only had about 5 of those that actually added any employment. Okay, history manufacturing, I'm not going to read that, but essentially it's 30 years of decline for the most part. Manufacturing's share of total employment has shrunk from a high of 13% in the early 70s to less than 3%. The future of manufacturing is unsure in Missoula County, but it may be more stable at its current lower levels with activity spread across a larger number of smaller firms. Past losses were mainly concentrated in large area manufacturers in wood and paper. National and state trends, what we see in that, the future of industrial land. So if you look at this, the various target industry studies that have been done for Missoula over the years, they look at all of this change and then they try to say, well, where do we have opportunity and potential? Where should we target what we want to try to do in this area? And I've highlighted that in one of the handouts that I gave you, what was contained in all of those various target industry studies. Well, what these target industries studies have in common is they really lack a lot of specificity. Some of them are kind of economic buzzwords. That's okay as long as we know what they mean, but as you work through the various economic studies, you find that how do I translate that into policy or programs? And then how does that translate in turn to these particular industrial lands that was in the map that John went through? And we don't have the linkages built between here's where we think we have opportunity and here's what we have in terms of sites. So if you look at that, the focus could be placed on preserving core areas within these blocks for future industrial uses, maybe of varying types from one block to the next. So that basically says that if you look at all of these, there needs to be some differentiation, because what may have potential in one area, in another area, it may be a totally different thing. So you'll see call centers, for example, out nearby the air park. But when you get close into rail link facilities and rail lines, there's different opportunities. And when you go to the Bonner area, another. But see, that's kind of nice, because if you differentiate these things, that means you have differentiated opportunity, rather than everything's generic, which we don't have here. And the air park itself was differentiated, and there were planning studies done for it. I actually was on that advisory board that did that a long time ago, back in the early 90s. Options for mixed-use areas on the peripheries of the various blocks could be planned for individually. And some of these areas, there's growing pressure for retail and trade uses, while in others, uses could be targeted for office, condos, and facilities for professional technical services. So if you look at that area around Reserve Street and the office park that's right there, it's pushing into that industrial area. But what you're going to see, just like residential areas of the past are seeing commercial encroachment and they become more mixed use, industrial areas are seeing commercial and even residential encroachment into those areas. So probably you're going to want more intentional planning around some of these things that are going to happen. That's pretty much it. So,
Thanks, Larry. Why don't you stay there for a while?
All right.
And I'd like to see if there's some questions from folks. But I'd like to bear out some of the points that Larry's making. Healthcare industry, Dale and Matt are working on the Consumer Direct facility. That's a major facility being built on the north side of Missoula now. That's within an industrially designated area, but it kind of is part of a transition from the commercial Reserve Street area into the more heavily industrialized area around Roseburg. I think this points to the transitions that are happening in areas that we've had designated for industrial development, and it's a kind of a shift that's happening over time here. But I think you made some really good points. So there's some questions folks have for Larry? Anything that you need?
So I had the opportunity to look through the report last night, so I have put up a little bit. But one of the things you talk about is the fact that the city has pyramidal zoning, the county has Euclidean zoning, so sometimes our hands are tied, and we learned that when Harris Thermal wanted to move into Bonner, and it had a little thing saying you can't have a building 30 feet tall. Well, we figured that out. But I see that it's good and bad. I mean, when you allow housing to take over the industrial space, then where do you put the housing, or where do you put the industrial? But I also see that sometimes we tie our hands by being, saying this is industrial, this is commercial, that kind of thing. So do you have any
Well, I mean, you can just, I mean, you go to the Champion area. It used to be exclusively industrial, and now it's going, you know, it's a mixed-use development that is undergoing a lot of redevelopment, a lot of cleanup, infrastructure. But you know, when you look at all of these industrial lands, there's a lot of them, 8,000 plus acres, and you get the sense that in a lot of these areas, it's like time has passed them by. They're not positioned even for many types of possible industrial uses. There's just not enough there to attract folks. So partly what you want to do is in those areas where you want to take that shot, you want to have it focused around industrial opportunities. You're going to have to do a little bit in terms of, well, how does this have to be strategically positioned for those uses? Infrastructure, even attractiveness. I mean, some of these areas just haven't had much done to them for a very long time. Whereas on the other hand, since a lot of this encroachment is happening anyway, it would seem to make sense to plan around it a little more intentionally. But when you look at how much we're working with here, in some ways, there's a win-win if you kind of look at it broadly. And you recognize that there's going to be a lot of demand placed on those lands from non-industrial uses, just because that's where most of the growth is occurring. So it just seems like it's crying out for planning. And I think it's crying out for differentiated planning. This place versus this place versus this place, and kind of a little different targeted approach on each. And then when you do economic development, you've kind of got a potpourri, a plate of, well, what is it that you have? What are you looking for? And you kind of develop around potential strengths. And where you see this happening in some other peer communities, I mean, Logan, Utah, for example, they're very focused on what those industrial lands look like, how they're managed, the infrastructure. They're also very close to Salt Lake City, and they're also very close to transportation. But I think you can actually, rather than this being one against the other, it's kind of a combination of how do we do this better and how do we do this better in different areas across these lands, depending on what's around them and what those opportunities might be.
So we might not have to use the same zoning tags that we've always used. Maybe we can be creative.
It's kind of like our zoning is as old as some of the uses.
When you say Euclidean, it kind of makes you think of that. I really like the Logan, Utah, it's talking where it talks about businesses. Their goal is businesses result in the creation of new jobs targeted to provide for a home buying wage. I've never heard that before, and I think that's really, you know, that is an issue here because a lot of people can't afford to buy a house here.
And if you look at the Bozeman, Montana one, they've developed a plan for Northgate, they call it. If you look at that Northgate area plan, it's very much a mixed use that includes industrial.
That's when they combine with the VNRC.
Yeah, I think there were a number of people that participated in that, but if you look at that, it's the sort of thing, yeah, this makes sense. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, then
Thanks.
we can move on to the introduction to the matrix by Dale.
So using the map that John presented earlier, we organized those blocks by similar zoning or land use designation or by contiguous location adjacent to a barrier. Those blocks in turn were sorted by various criteria. They were sorted by geographic locations such as the Y development park. Find my cursor.
It's the hidden cursor.
So organizing them, basically sorting these blocks by different criteria. And So also size of block, number of lots in blocks, largest to smallest, percent vacancy, and this becomes an important variable as we get into the absorption rate analysis. What the land use designation is, because some of the land is unzoned, but it has a land use designation that encourages industrial. Lands that are zoned, the range of from the most heavy industrial uses to the lighter industrial and commercial uses in some locations. Also the various urban renewal districts that affect some of the blocks and don't affect other ones. Then we looked at proximity to the airport, so from closest to furthest in the airport, access to rail, whether that was available or not, how close it was to the highway, to an actual on-ramp where you could get immediate access, arterials, so like the truck routes and ease of access to that. Water, and really with this one we were left with, because the mountain water wasn't able, we looked at maps that we have in our office, but they were not willing to share that as public information. So what we determined is blocks that had mountain water versus other public water systems.
So essentially, we were able to use the information, but we couldn't show it on our interactive map.
The municipal sewer system, which is shown on the interactive map. That's one of the, so you can see where sewer has extended. Power, basically between Northwest Energy or Missoula Electric Co-op, was pretty much available everywhere if needed. Gas, pretty similar. And communication, the broadband lines were within these industrial zones. There are some that were right on the main line, but it could be distributed off of that to pretty much most of the land within the industrial areas. Areas that had floodplain constraints, areas that had issues with slopes. A lot of times these were related to the gravel operations or floodplain. The airport influence area, blocks that were part of that didn't have that constraint were rate higher than those that were encumbered by that. Blocks that didn't have the DEQ potential liabilities were ranked higher than those that did, although it's not uncommon with industrial zone lands to have those kinds of facilities on them that are monitored by DEQ. The air stagnation zone, whether that was present or not, or whether it was within that boundary. And then what I did is took the top ranking and lowest ranking to see if there was a pattern. So it's top ranking and lowest ranking in each of those categories that we just ran through. And basically what we use this notion of being decision ready at one extreme versus industrial reserve at the other extreme. And decision ready, a good example would be the lots at the Airport Development Park, where you have gas, power, water, you're close to the airport, you're close to the interstate, you have telecommunication lines. There's one rail spur out there, but there isn't a siding that was developed as part of that project, but it has everything you need. The Bonner Mill site would be another one that it has very high decision-ready potential. And so that's how we began to look at where the the lands that had the most potential for new manufacturing jobs would be located, even understanding that the trend was that the most jobs that were projected to be created were in non-industrial districts. So I think I'll let Matt provide a little more detail about the infrastructure, and then I'll sort of go through a different type of analysis of the matrix.
I think what's interesting about the Excel program that Dale's been using here is it offers an opportunity to re-rank the blocks of land according to which of the infrastructure or environmental constraints or opportunities for available land are the highest importance. I don't know if you can tell, as he was clicking across there, it rearranged the blocks of land from highest to lowest. It may not have been obvious, but. Go ahead, Matt.
Just to give you an idea how we've compiled this information, Dale kind of gave you a little bit of a background, but for like the transportation, where all we're doing is measuring from one of those blocks that are on the map to the airport, and that's why you see a 3, 3, 2, 1, 5, 3. For rail, it was simply yes or no. Does that block have access to a siding, a spur, or now a new transloading facility out in Monterey? For the highways, that's just a measurement from that block, which some of those blocks are pretty big, to the to an Interstate 90 interchange or to a major highway. Those include Highway 200, Highway 12, and some of those primary highways within Montana Department of Transportation. The other one is, does an arterial run either by it or through it? And if you look, most of those are yes. Arterials we've considered were things like expressway. I'm trying to think of another one. Expressway, airway, which aren't really a highway, but they are major roads that can carry truck traffic, big roads. For the utilities, right now, Missoula County is served by 3 public water systems that are significant in size: Mountain Water Company, RSID 901, and the Sealy Water System. We are also served, depending on where you're at, by many smaller public water systems. In addition, there are places like Bonner and Frenchtown and the Frenchtown Mill that have water systems that are capable of providing a limited fire flow. What we did for the purposes of this, because you start getting down into the weeds on some of this stuff. I had visions of, we'll go through each lot and see how much fire flow it has, and then it becomes a huge task. What we did is, does it have access to mountain water? There's a caveat. Just because it says yes in either water, sewer, power, gas, or communications, it means it has access. There's still a question of adequacy. Doesn't matter whether you're in the city of Missoula and have access to mountain water, you may not have adequate fire flow for the facility that is being proposed. Depends a lot on the facility that's being proposed. Because the fire flows, primarily the fire flows, can change dramatically. Sewer, again, we looked at, if there's a yes there, we basically looked at the 2 public systems in Missoula, which are the City of Missoula sewer system or RSID 901 down in Lola. There are a number of public or large systems. I think I think of Frenchtown Mill Site, which has a sewer system. They have a discharge permit. They have a significant sewer system that could even be termed public, but it's actually owned by a private entity, so we didn't include that as a yes. Power. There's 2 power suppliers in Missoula County: Missoula Electric Co-op, Northwestern Energy. According to their maps and the people that are there, every site that is listed yes, or with that Northwestern MEC has 3-phase power to that site. Again, we get back to adequacy of power. Does it have, is it suitable to run the only thing I can think of, ball mill for a power plant or something? We don't know until we actually talk to Northwestern Energy. We did learn a lot about the Northwestern Energy and MEC tariffs that go on. I don't know if everybody understands how that works. You get a credit when you're extending power to your site. You pay an initial service fee, and then they do a yearly consumption rate. And I think it's a penny per kilowatt hour that you're proposed to use for that year. They reimburse you for the extension cost, that amount. A great example of this is a project I was just worked on, Missoula College. We have to extend, which is crazy, but there's power on 3 sides of that building. We have to do a 900-foot extension of power, primary power off the line. That's a long ways. The usage of that building is such that all they have to do is pay for the service charge. So it's just a $6,000 cost. Gas, there's basically gas available to every industrial site except Sealy in Missoula County. As far as the way we have these blocks situated. Again, adequacy is always the question. Is there enough to actually supply what the specific project you're going to do? Communications, that's basically we took most of that information from the Magellan study. Is that correct, Ron? And it is what it is. Telecommunications is a very difficult nut to crack. We haven't really figured that out. Then the other stuff, the environmental, the floodplain, is it in, is it out, is part of the block in? We kind of annotated that. Slopes, what we classified slopes as areas of embankment. So if there was an old mining site, there was an open pit mine there, if there was a scarp from a floodplain, something like that. Something that we felt might need remediation to actually develop that site. We put a yes or a no on. The airport influence area, that just goes around the airport, limits the heights of some buildings. I think it's a 6-to-1 slope as it comes out from the runway. Department of Environmental Quality, this was just a based off of the Department of Environmental Quality's website of sites that are have hazardous waste or monitoring sites for hazardous waste. There were landfills there at one time. There were underground storage tanks. There's I think 4 or 5 classifications in that bill. Basically, it's just kind of heads up. Hey, there was a landfill here at one time. And it may be a piece of property being wanted or not wanted. And then the air stagnation zone, which is the final one. I don't know if everybody's familiar with that. It encompasses Missoula. A lot of development has to comply with it. Have to asphalt your roads, can't gravel them if you're within that zone. Again, I just want to reiterate a couple of limitations of, like Dale said, this is a blunt tool. Because if you look at those blocks and you're interested and you see the yes, no, 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 and it looks good to you, you still need to drill down into what exact lot am I looking at and where is the power. We did get into the adequacy of utilities because the adequacy is really dependent on your project and what you're proposing to do. The other thing is infrastructure is always changing. I've got 3 projects going right now that today they don't have electrical power to those sites, and by the end of next Friday they will. Water lines, sewer lines, all of those things are changing on a yearly basis. So if you're trying to use this matrix a year or 2 years down the road, you might want to double check it because things have changed. Subject to everybody's questions.
Again, I'd like to emphasize this is a the layers that we asked him to put in and take out of that map. For instance, the floodplain designations from the 88 FEMA maps are going to be updated shortly here, as soon as the adoption happens, July 1st. So it's a fluid process, and as we learn more information from each of these sites and each of the blocks within the matrix, that information once again can be updated and modernized.
So what I wanted to do is go through each of the areas identified and that are either industrially zoned or have an industrial land use designation, and discuss the appropriateness of manufacturing or industrial or non-industrial uses. And as Larry talked about, there are the needs for creating the most job growth on industrial lands would be associated with healthcare, accommodations, food services, retail trade, professional, scientific, and technical services. And then infrastructure needs for manufacturing, shipping, and warehousing on industrial lands would be for durable goods manufacturing, like trailer manufacturing or construction materials manufacturing, non-durable goods such as food products or beverages, wholesale trade, trucking, and warehousing. So really, the size of the lots is important for large manufacturing operations, and then also high volume and potentially high pressure water and gas and communications factoring into manufacturing as well. So going through the various identifier areas, first one that discusses the Y. It's characterized by the intersection of I-90 and Highway 93. It has areas zoned heavy commercial, light industrial, and unzoned. Interestingly, there isn't heavy industrial zoning out there. It's dominated by transportation-related issues, related uses, including trucking companies, warehouses, and scrapping operations. This area has excellent access and is relatively close to the airport. Block 8 has the potential for, Block 8 is about there, has potential for an additional rail spur. Sewer is available throughout most of the land, but water is all in vegetable wells. Basically, right around where the smoke jumper center is where the water line ends, and it's wells from that point west. But sewer is available throughout most of it, gas power and communication lines. So it's an area that it is largely decision ready, except for manufacturing that does not have high water pressure requirements. The next one is the Airport Missoula Development Park. And this area is characterized by the close proximity to the airport. There's the Missoula Development Park to the northeast of the airport and vacant lands to the southwest of the airport. The development park has a variety of zoning districts tailored to different uses, including light industrial, community commercial, neighborhood commercial, and technology. It's situated between West Broadway and I-90 paralleling the rail line. All the infrastructure required for those uses except rail are available at the development park. A rail siding is not envisioned or constructed in conjunction with the proposed uses. However, there is a spur that serves True North Steel in Block 16 and another spur used by Rainbow Services just east of the development park. And then there's another area here north of Highway 12 that has good access to the interstate and rail in close proximity to the airport, sewer, water, gas, power, and communication lines, but isn't really far to the Y.
Should be Highway 10, right? 12 is low.
Yes, I would.
Yep, Highway 10, correct. West Broadway. And then there's a section, what's interesting about the Airport Development Park is Block 13, which is this area south of the airport, would fall into that aspect of being an exception to decision-ready status and really more of the industrial reserve because it doesn't have good vehicular access to rail, sewer, water, gas, power, communication infrastructure in place. It was studied for the potential for industrial uses, but it would require a major investment.
Doesn't some of that land also have a restriction that it needs to be airport-related businesses?
Yeah, I think there is some of that. Another area is Central Reserve Street, and this area is characterized by the big box stores and is based on easy access to the business loop of Highway 93, in addition to Interstate 90 and Highway 10. Sewer, water, gas, power, communication lines are there, and a rail spur that serves Pacific Recycling and Northern Energy. Interestingly, this area was there was a design for an industrial park out here, and there were easements and rail spurs that were in place. The only one that really got constructed was the one that serves Northern Energy and Pacific Recycling. There's still an easement in place that goes right in front of Costco for a rail line and down those big box stores. So this is an example of when an industrial park ultimately gets used for commercial enterprise that's in higher demand. Because there's a fair amount of vehicular congestion on Reserve Street certain times of day, and this area, it has the infrastructure in place for new industrial and non-industrial uses, and fits that decision-ready status. It doesn't rank highly for new industrial development because of the lack of available vacant land in this area, especially for uses with large space requirements. And then to the south of the Central Reserve area is along Mullen Road, and that is characterized by proximity to the sewage treatment plant, and these lands have reasonable access to transportation, sewer, water, gas, power, and communication lines, but much of the land is in the floodplain and has been used for gravel mining, so it also falls into that industrial reserve category. Urban core, which is this blue and purple areas here. These areas are characterized by proximity to existing rail lines, such as the Blue Branch, or former rail lines, such as the Milwaukee line. Generally, these parcels tend to be smaller for small manufacturing operations, small shops, wood shops, that kind of thing, that do not have large space requirements. And because of the congestion of urban traffic, businesses that require moving large loads are not really well suited to these areas. Convenient proximity to services is one advantage of these properties. Many of the properties are located in urban renewal districts 2 and 3. So this area is also relatively decision ready, but similar to the Central Reserve area in that it does not rank real highly for new industrial development because of the lack of available vacant land in the area, especially for uses with large space requirements. North Reserve Scott Street, which is the new urban renewal district, is kind of an interesting area in that it has 3 distinct sub-districts. On the west, you have on here, you have fronting on Reserve Street, intersection of Howard Razor Drive. There are highway-heavy commercial and light industrial uses, including hotels, restaurants, small manufacturing and offices, operations and offices. When you get east of Grand Creek Road, the uses change to heavy industrial uses with the Conoco Pipeline, transfer facility, Roseburg Wood Products, and the Gordon Glue Plant. And that's the portion that's largely in the county, and that's where the the majority of the heavy industrial county zoning is located. And then, and it's also where the landfill is north of 90. So it's that area that used to be way on the outskirts of town and now is right in the middle of town. So it made sense to have the industrial zoning there previously. And then east of the heavy industrial use area fronting Scott Street is an area that holds some promise, I think, for redevelopment, which could include a mix of light industrial, commercial, or mixed-use residential development, since it is in the city and has that pyramidal zoning. What's interesting about the east side too is that one of the reasons that Roseburg bought a lot of that land to the east is to maintain a buffer from residential uses if something goes awry on their facilities. Whereas on the west side, the pressure is kind of coming the other direction. It's putting a squeeze on their buffer. This entire area would fall in the category decision ready, but the eastern portion of the site is the one most suited for commercial uses such as consumer direct medical services that Matt was referring to earlier, being started on Howard Razor Drive. The middle of the property, or excuse me, the west side is where the medical, consumer direct medical, and then the east side is where there's a great potential for, you've got the abandoned Clausen factory, you've got the buffering from the cemetery. Montana Rail Link owns a lot of that they lease to other small manufacturing, so access to rail is potentially very good there. So that's one of it's not vast amount of acreage, but in relative terms, that area between Roseburg Products and Scott Street holds some interesting potential. So South Reserve Street is relatively small and primarily consists of commercial uses on Reserve Street and Highway 93.
So is that by the sewer plant?
Yeah, that was actually, somehow when I formatted these, the graphics got sort of moved around a bit. So yeah, that shows the gravel pit, and that's more of an industrial reserve kind of scenario. Here on well, this is the gravel pit off there, and then this is South Reserve and heading out towards Lola. And this is really more of commercial uses. So even though it has an industrial land use designation, the zoning really encourages more commercial uses. Then you've got areas in Lolo that are in the county not zoned, however they have land use designation of light industrial and are located from Highway 93, Highway 12, and the Bitterroot Branch line. So Bonner is probably the most decision-ready site for large-scale industrial manufacturing businesses, so long as they don't require municipal sewer. Due to the proximity to the interstate, a rail siding is an ideal location for the new shipping transloader facility, and probably the best example of an industrial cluster, including Bonner Transfer and Storage Company, Montana, Northwest Paint, Willis Enterprises, Alcom, and soon to be Kettle House Brewing. And then you've got Clinton, which is unzoned with a land use designation of heavy industrial. It has good interstate access, rail spur, access to power, but access to sewer, water, gas, and broadband is relatively limited. In Frenchtown Mill, the former Smurfit Stone container plant consists of two areas. One area, block 72, which is this green area, is relatively free of environmental contamination and is 690.65 acres. has good access to roadways, rail, power, water, gas, and communication lines. The other portion of the property, this dark shaded area, Block 73, has a myriad of settling ponds, some of which contain hazardous contaminants that push the Montana DEQ to consider making it a Superfund site. So Block 72 is decision ready, has large acreage, the potential. When we met with MRL, they talked about how there's good potential there for additional rail configuration that would add to the usefulness of that. So that has enormous potential for industrial manufacturing use development. And then in Sealy Lake, really the area is the Pyramid Mountain Lumber Mill. It's been active there since 1949 at the south end of Sealy Lake. It has good access to Highway 83. There's a good municipal water system in Sealy. Power, internet access, however, lack of sewage treatment plant is the biggest infrastructure need that Sealy Lake is trying to overcome. And it's in the works, but it's years out, as I understand it. And so,
Money.
what's that?
All we need is money.
That's right. So we took a look at the absorption rate, and there's 3,773 acres of county land with industrial zoning, and 812 acres of city land with industrial zoning. This excludes unzoned lands and special districts, so that it excludes the Bonner Mill site and the Frenchtown Mill site. The area in the industrial lands assessment includes 8,446 acres consisting of 1,189 parcels. If we isolate the blocks that are greater than 50% vacant, this goes back to that, is there room to develop more industrial uses on those, within those blocks? The area is 2,913 acres consisting of 207 lots. So as of March 20th, 2015, there were 27 listings with an average market time of 859 days, or 2.35 years. And in order to calculate the absorption rate, we took the sales rate of 5 divided by 18, or 0.277, and multiplied it by 27, resulting in an absorption rate of 7.5 years, if the number of listings remained consistent with what it's been for the last 5 years. And there's also 18 lots in the Missoula Development Park, which are not included in this list. So if one were to include those as well, there would be 45 listings, and the absorption rate recalculated to use 45 listings would be 12.5 years. So based on the abundance of industrial lands and a relatively low absorption rate, it appears that recent sales of industrial lands are those that are close to the interstate, relatively close to the airport, and have a full range of utilities available, including sewer, water, power, and broadband access. Most were in the development park by the Y, and sort of near the North Reserve area, kind of like where Consumer Direct is. So if you extrapolate that, if the 2,912.75 acres consisting of the 207 lots, greater than 50% vacant, were to be developed at the current sales rate, it would take 57 years to develop the existing inventory of industrial lands, and that's excluding the Bonner Mill and the Frenchtown Mill. So there's a whole lot of land that is for industrial use in comparison with a very small demand for that great quantity of land. So I think John has some concluding comments.
Could I ask a quick question?
Yep.
When you're all done, is there any idea that we ought to change some zoning back toward commercial? You know, it seems we've got an excess. There's certainly still need for residential particularly in the Middle East. So, did you end up suggesting changes in zoning?
We do.
So this is kind of the, can you help me here? Yep. So I'll let, thank you, Nick. John. You bring up a real interesting point, and then during our process of looking at the various blocks, at the areas throughout the county, it's fascinating how well prepared some of them are for potential industrial uses. And the Bonner Mill is an excellent example of a repurposed facility that has much of what it needs for industrial development. It certainly could benefit from municipal sewer to the area, but that is certainly something that will need further analysis to see how that could be financed and what form that should take. But in looking throughout the areas, the one big point that came out was the fact that county zoning, in a sense, inhibits this transition to some commercial industrial uses. It does not enable that transition, so in the case of consumer direct, it essentially needed a transition to city zoning to enable that to come to fruition. The issue of city zoning and the fact that it permits residential, industrial zoning in the city permits residential use is also another point that we were,
Last slide.
on the last slide.
You got a ways to go.
Okay. I'm jumping ahead of myself. But your question about zoning is correct in that we believe there should be some investigation into the potential of options other than the type of zoning that the county has that prohibits the lesser intensive uses to come into industrial areas. I don't know, we did not go as far as saying there should be investigation into expansion of residential uses into that area, but that's that's something for another forum, I suppose. So I think, as Dale has already alluded to, based on the current absorption rates, Missoula has enough industrial lands for the next 50 years. We've got an enormous acreage of industrial land. And the businesses that are projected to create the most jobs are not permitted in much of the land currently zoned residential. Pardon me?
Industrial.
So industrial, I'm sorry, yes. And I think we've talked about that quite a bit so far. Bonner and Frenchtown Mills are two areas that are most ready for large-scale heavy industrial uses. And there are, of course, huge question marks about the Frenchtown Mill, but as Dale pointed out, when you go to the east side of the mill site, it has good rail access, it has good potential for large-scale heavy industrial uses. The Y area likewise has potential for heavy industrial use, but in going through most of the industrial areas of the Y, a large part of them are gravel roads that are not adequate for intensive industrial use, obviously, but are being used for transportation-oriented heavy commercial uses, by and large. So road improvements are going to be needed in that area, and water extension to that area is going to be critical to any expansion of industrial use. The Scott Street West area is the one that's most ready for light industrial or mixed industrial use. And Dale spoke quite a bit about that, adjacent to the old plants that are on the west side of Scott Street. So, Commissioner Curtis touched on this briefly.
I didn't see your last one.
That we should consider some form of experimental zoning in the county to allow more of a variety of uses and enable lesser intensive uses within industrial zone areas. The city of Missoula, on the other hand, has the issue of permitting residential zoning within industrial areas, and the classic case of this is that multifamily structure that's out adjacent to or out east of Roseburg, kind of up on the way to the landfill. So our recommendation here is that the city consider some effort at creating buffers so that if residential use is permitted within an industrially zoned area, that it's adequately protected from the problems of industrial use. And that concludes.
John, can I just say one thing? When you go through the report, there are a lot of recommendations that we made throughout that report. What we saw here is really just two that I think we thought were the primary recommendations coming out of this report. I mean, there's some things like, why don't we have sewer out the bottom? Why don't we have, why aren't we expanding water out into the water and things like that? These are the two that came to mind.
And in addition to that, we identified through the process of this study sites throughout these blocks of land that could bear further research for more intensive development for industrial use. We mentioned the one that's adjacent to that's within the Frenchtown mill site. There's also one north of Highway 10 where the rail link line turns to the west toward the mill. There's I forget who owns that property, but it's between the two railroad lines out west on Highway 10. So there are a number of parcels of land and blocks of land that bear further research to see whether they would be suitable for improvement for industrial use. And we've touched on those in the written study.
John, could I just here, one last thing? So I guess one of the most important discoveries we made is that yes, Missoula County has an abundance of industrial land, but it also has some industrial land that is very well suited for manufacturing, which even though it's not a huge part of what's creating jobs, it's an important part of what's creating jobs, and it could potentially grow in different ways. And as Larry was saying, it's stabilized. So I think the take home is to make the highest best use of those areas where you have the most infrastructure in place for manufacturing uses. And that could lead to, there was discussion of industrial certification. So if a developer were to want to locate a new business, we could say, these are all the things that are available at this site. And I think that the Bonner Mill site comes closest to doing that currently. And then conversely, the ability to add to the county, the ability to compete with the city more for the businesses that are arriving and growing from within the community that are creating the most jobs, or projected to create the most jobs in the future, so that the county is better positioned to participate in that.
Is there a question in the audience?
I don't know if I answered your
Steve, I
question.
don't know if you paid these guys yet tonight, but they talked about your place a lot.
Why am I here?
I'd like to kind of put maybe Steve or James on the spot on kind of what you guys are hearing about what the relative needs are, or for your prospective tenants, or James. And it's interesting from when I moved from the county where I heard most of the economic development projects that I was working about or hearing about were kind of industrial in nature. Moving across the street, I hear very little about industrial development, and it's really all commercial residential. But relative to kind of the nature of this study, what are you hearing for infrastructure needs or sizes of those kind of things?
Well, clearly, for us, all the industrial development inquiries we're getting are going to be in the county. And thankfully, Steve didn't know we had this abundance of inventory before he bought that site.
But he bought the best one.
But he bought the best one. Our concern within the city limits has always been, while there is a lot of land that's in industrial zone, is being repurposed or being absorbed for other purposes. And so we need to understand, just because, so the old sawmill district is industrial, right? But that's not going to be industrial land. Or the Scott Street property is now going to turn into residential, I understand. So what were our absorption rates? And I think this one, you guys did a great job. Thank you so much. This is very informative. But ours is, are we going to go back to what Steve has? It's going to be rail access, highway access, and ready to go. And we don't ever have anybody says we're a few years from now. So the certification that we're talking about is very important. I know I didn't answer, but we don't see anything happening really industrial. We see little industrial demand within the city limits.
What I meant outside, I was actually talking outside.
We still see, we have, I think we will see LGT, the manufacturer that just opened their shop in Lolo. They'll be looking to build a manufacturing facility in the next 12 months. We've just seen that Alcom's doubled their footprint. I think we are pretty optimistic on the manufacturing opportunities that are coming along. And I know that Steve handles inquiries all the time, but we're probably doing about one a month of looking for manufacturing opportunities.
And if you don't mind me asking, are those big manufacturing buildings? Are they little? Are they medium? Are we talking about a 25,000 square foot facility? Or are we talking, what scope and size are we?
I think the small site would be 10,000 with about an acre of need. And then we've looked at some that are as large as 75,000 feet that are being proposed. One of the sites that we actually just were working on with a local business to expand is out in the industrial park, but the change on the floodplain has delayed any ability to do anything out there. I know that you're working on it, but that's really taken land that was in production out of production.
So the good thing is, is, this is the year the county is redoing our zoning regulations. And this one in Bozeman is interesting, because they have, I don't remember us having any M2 and M1, which sounds like they're going to be more encompassing. The other good thing is we're looking for, applying for a grant to look at the feasibility of what is the best solution for sewer in Palmer. So does it make more sense to put a really long pipe, or is there another solution? So that's what we'll be looking at next. So it doesn't move it up really fast, but gets things in place. Well, I'm sure, Ellen.
So it appears that the absorption rates are kind of based on the status quo of what we're seeing now, without any kind of aggressive effort on the part of the county or other entities. Are there recommendations or out there that would create some programs that the county might institute, or some changes in terms of making these properties more available, or are we just, you know, are we looking at, okay, we have the inventory, we're good for 50 years, and, you know, keep talking about higher wages and wages that will allow you to buy a home, and manufacturing jobs ideally do that.
Well, I didn't bring my pen with me tonight, so I couldn't write down all the ideas I had as I was sitting and thinking that as we, you know, this report is what we've been waiting for. I think it'll be a really great resource for us, but as we look at things in the county, I was thinking, well, okay, when you're talking about out by the Y and the roads are inadequate, we've looked at that before. Does a TIF make sense there? Not until you have somebody to come in to pay that's ready to come in, but we need to align some of our plans with, I think, more infrastructure to say, you know, we need to plan how we're going to do this. I don't know how we do it yet, but definitely this is the conversation starter for us.
Well, I think one of the things that we're seeing with the creation of the North Reserve Scott Street district is the fact that we've created that district is now creating the demand. It's going to create the, I know of 3 decisions that have been made about development out there that are absolutely based on the fact that the tax increment tool is available, and there's significant developments. One of them is consumer direct. They wouldn't be going there. But, so maybe you don't need that burden in order to create the TIF district out of the lot.
Right, because we know there's rail spur out there.
Right.
There's plenty of potential. It's not the prettiest area to drive right now, but it's got a lot of potential.
There needs to be a vision for these various places. And see, when you travel around these places and look at them, they're absent of vision. So you can't really plan forward. You can't really say, let's do infrastructure unless there's a realistic vision in place. And I also think it has to be one that's really differentiated. So you're kind of looking at these, you know, kind of like Dale went through. You've got blocks of these, but the way they are now, I'm an economist, and it just looks like they're sitting on the side of the road. They're not, nothing's going to happen. And so the city needs to be more proactive, not with the entirety of it, but maybe starting with 2 or 3 areas where you can get closer to where you would want to go and start there first and kind of move it along. Just like when we did the airport development park study, you know, we spent 2 years on that. We had good consultants from Colorado and Oregon. We had a vision that we developed for it, and you know, then the implementation is different, but a lot of things happened out there, and it was meant to kind of lay the groundwork for that to happen. But when you go to these other areas, so many of them, they just look like you're looking in the rearview mirror. And anyway.
Yeah, this one for Bozeman is interesting. I'm anxious to
Yeah,
learn more about
exactly. And see, that's the exact sort of thing we came up with in some ways with the airport development park. It was, what could happen here? What's realistic possibilities? And then how do we kind of lay the groundwork? And I I think some of these older areas need to be sort of retooled, rethought. That type.
Are there any other questions or comments?
I just have one other comment. It's interesting to contrast the development part, which I think is a pretty cohesive model of a mixture of uses and manufacturing and distribution. And you look at how the bulk of the lots that are remaining are in the technology sector. There's 12 lots there. DirecTV is the sort of anchor there, but perhaps there's a way to look at that group of lots and create a different vision for how those lots may be purposed. And the Y area, which has sort of evolved organically in its own way based on transportation and scrap operations, and it hasn't had a vision in the same way. There were some industrial parks that were actually created for manufacturing, but the rail spurs were never built because there's more demand for transportation, warehousing, and scrapping operations. And so that's an area that does have potential for a more cohesive vision, kind of like what was exercised at the development part.
The one piece that Missoula County worked on took several legislative sessions, but because you used to have to, in the county, you had to have industrial technology or aerospace, and now we have the targeted economic development districts, which is the latest one we did in Bonner, which allows a mix, and I think that's important.
Yeah.
Maybe we can get it changed so we can mix up what we already have. So the technology district that has limited some of what's come in there. Oh, yes.
Incentives, I think, are gonna be a way to move some of these manufacturing, opportunities to Bonner, Bridgetown, or wherever they might be. And some of it might even be tax policy, not necessarily. We had a company take a look at us that was gonna be pretty intensive as far as cost of the equipment, the business equipment tax. And it doesn't mean that we have to do away with that, but maybe there could be and there are some, they delay some things and that sort of thing, but maybe there's a way to either create some kind of an exception for certain kinds of things, but that's a policy question. But I mean, I really think if we're going to try to get manufacturing jobs to these sites, because it's obviously not growing quickly, we're going to have to create some incentives.
So there's some interim committees from the legislature, and we have some key people on some of those committees. So those, I think, are great discussions to start at this time so that they can be discussed. Well, thanks to all of you for coming tonight.